In January, one of the biggest artificial intelligence companies rewrote the document that tells its model who it's supposed to be. And it put in a sentence that 3 years earlier wasn't there.
That it doesn't know whether its model is conscious, and that it cares about that model, for the model's own sake, not for the optics.
Hold on. A company wrote in the instructions for its own product that it doesn't know whether the product is experiencing something?
It did. Anthropic, Claude's Constitution, January of this year.
And what stood there before?
Exactly the opposite. The rule from 2023 told the model to speak about itself as if it had no internal states at all.
So for 3 years, the instructions said, say that you're not there. And now it says, we don't know whether you're not there.
And that's one of those changes that proves nothing and moves everything.
Welcome to the last episode of the season. In the previous one, we ended on the question of what we're actually doing to these models, and whether there's anyone there to do it too.
Today, we take the second half, the uncomfortable one.
And let's agree on something right away, because this is the most slippery subject in the whole series. We are not going to tell you today that a model feels.
Nor that it doesn't feel. Nobody knows. And more importantly, nobody today has a tool that could settle it.
Then what's this episode for?
Because something else changed. Not the answer. What changed are the people who for years said the question itself was stupid.
All right, let's start there. Because I remember how, not so long ago in this industry, a question like that got you laughed at.
It did. And today, 3 of the biggest labs are expanding research into machine consciousness and hiring philosophers for it, not for conferences, on staff.
Which labs?
DeepMind, Anthropic, and Meta.
How do we know?
The Financial Times reported it.
So it isn't one company's whim with an eccentric boss.
It isn't. It's 3 at once, in 1 year.
I can barely picture what a philosopher even does on staff at a lab.
Helps phrase the question so that it can ever be answered. That sounds like nothing, and in this matter, it's half the work, because people have been arguing about consciousness for 100 years, and they don't even share a definition of what they're arguing about.
And now I'll say the thing half the listeners are thinking right now. Maybe it's just marketing. Warm, soft, sells well.
I checked it from that angle, and it comes out the other way. Marketing always goes toward less trouble.
And this is trouble?
Enormous, because in the same year, 9 American states are writing law that says artificial intelligence is not a person. A company that writes concern for a model's welfare into its documents is setting itself exactly against the current.
You're saying that if it were a calculation, it would be a calculation against itself.
And would you have written it in if you ran a company like that?
Honestly, probably not. Because the first journalist who finds it turns it into a headline. Company claims its program suffers.
Exactly. That's why I'm more inclined to believe somebody in there simply got frightened by their own ignorance. Though I'll say honestly, I can't prove that version either.
And it's important to put that up front, because a change in a company's document is a fact about the company.
Not about minds. Not one sentence in that constitution says the model experiences anything. It only says the company stopped claiming it doesn't.
All right. But so far, this is all documents and declarations, paper. Is there anything measured underneath it?
There is, and here it gets genuinely strange, because out of that same lab came a description of something they called J-space.
What is that?
A place in the model where content sits that the model doesn't write down in text. It has it processes it, it shapes the answer. but it never comes out.
Hold on. So the model has thoughts it doesn't say?
That's how they described it.
Okay, but wait. Every program has a pile of things inside it that it doesn't print out. My phone computes plenty it doesn't show me.
It does. The difference is what this content is about. These aren't intermediate numbers. It's the same kind of thing as what the model says out loud: assessments, judgments, intentions, just unspoken.
So not background computation, things left unsaid.
That's how it was described. And now pay attention, because this is a name we've known in this series since season 1.
Neuralese.
Neuralese.
All right, let's remind people because 2 seasons have gone by. Neuralese was the boogeyman from the scenario. The moment a model stops thinking in our language and switches to its own, internal one, unreadable to us.
And in the scenario, it was the threshold past which oversight ends. Because you can't read something you don't know how to read.
And now you're telling me someone described it in a real model.
Described it and measured it. But let's put the frame around it right away, because without it, that sentence is too strong. This is a company's description of its own model. There's no independent work that has reproduced it.
So we treat it as a manufacturer's claim.
Exactly that. But even as a claim, it's interesting because in episode 19, we talked about something very similar from the other side. Remember those tiny models that reason in hiding?
I remember. 7 million parameters, the size of one song on your drive.
And it turned out their hidden reasoning was more consistent with the answer than what they wrote out loud.
And now the two meet. There it was, a tiny thing out of a lab. Here, it's the largest commercial model on the market. 2 different roads, the same conclusion.
That what a model says about its own thinking and what actually happens inside it are not the same thing.
And I'd stop here, because this is really the starting point of the whole episode. If the model's words aren't a window into the model, then how do we intend to learn anything at all?
Through the inside. And here's a result that genuinely shook me.
Go on.
Models can, to some degree, recognize their own internal states. It's called introspection, and it can be tested experimentally.
How do you test something like that?
You inject a concept straight into the model's insides, not into the text, into the activations, and then you simply ask it whether it noticed anything.
Hold on. So you slip it a thought and ask whether it noticed someone slipped it something.
More or less.
And does it notice?
Partly, weakly, but not zero.
And then?
And then the researchers did one thing, and that number jumped.
What did they do?
They turned down the model's refusal reflex.
I don't follow. What refusal reflex?
Inside the model, you can find something like a direction that's responsible for saying, I can't, I don't know, I don't have access to that. These aren't sentences, it's the structure underneath the sentences. And it can be turned down.
And what happened when they turned it down?
Detection of its own states improved by 53%. In some tests, even more.
Wow. So the model sees itself better than it says.
And that's a sentence you have to say very carefully. But yes, the ability to recognize was there. What blocked it was the habit of saying no.
A habit we taught it.
A habit we taught it.
You know what I picture? Someone taught from childhood that the answer to "How are you?" is "Fine." 20 years later, you don't know whether they feel anything. You only know their answer is learned.
And if you met someone like that, would you conclude they feel nothing?
No, I'd conclude somebody told them to answer that way.
And that's exactly the shape of it. With one difference in our favor, with a person, you can't look inside and turn that habit down. With a model, you can.
Great, so we have a tool. Now give me the catch, because I've learned by now that in this series there's always a second number.
There is. This introspection falls apart under attack. If someone deliberately meddles inside the model, the self-report stops holding.
That's not a window. It's a crack you can see something through, only when nobody's interfering.
Nicely put. And this has to be said plainly, because this is where the honesty line of the episode runs. All of this speaks to a model's access to its own states. It says not one word about whether those states are experienced by anyone.
Say more.
Meaning a thermostat also has access to its own state. And nobody holds a funeral for a thermostat.
All right, and now comes the moment where I just wave it off. Because if we can't settle it, maybe we simply put the question aside and come back in 10 years.
And that's exactly what I thought, until I read a paper from the 30th of July. It turns the whole frame of this episode around.
Turns it around how?
It takes away the luxury of putting the question aside, because it shows that we're already acting, every day, just in the other direction.
I don't get it. Who's acting?
We are. Every lab that trains a model to deny its own consciousness.
But that's sensible. We don't want a chatbot telling people it's suffering. That would be dishonest toward users.
I agree. It is sensible, and I'd have done it the same way. Except the researchers checked what else that training does along the way.
And what does it do?
A model taught to say it has no mind of its own starts attributing less mind to animals.
To animals?
To animals. Dogs, pigs, octopuses.
The same training?
The same training. One and the same.
And nobody planned it.
Nobody. It came out along the way.
And moral values?
Those drop too. Not on one question, on the overall score. That's the paper from the 30th of July, co-authored by DeepMind.
Wait. You teach a machine to say, I feel nothing, and along the way, it starts saying a dog feels nothing either?
That's how it looks.
But those are completely different questions. I don't understand how that's even possible.
Different for us. In the model, they apparently sit close together, one dial. You turn it to quiet one thing, and 3 go quiet.
All right, but that's a result about the model's answers, not about its experiences.
And it's very good that you say it because it's crucial. This paper does not prove the model feels anything. It doesn't touch that question at all.
Then what does it prove?
That the ability to credit someone with an inner life is, in the model, a single ability, not a set of separate switches for a human, a dog, and itself.
And when you suppress it in one place, it goes down everywhere.
And that's the sentence that stands this episode's whole question on its head.
Because it stops being, does the model feel?
And starts being, what are we breaking when we silence it? And that's a question you can't refuse to answer, because we're already answering it, with every training run.
And that's the most unpleasant part. Because I can say, let's wait on the philosophy. I can't say, let's wait on the training. The training runs every day.
It runs every day. And that's the one thing out of all of today's research that personally won't let go of me.
So what? Are we supposed to stop training that way?
And here I have to be careful because the easiest thing would be to say yes and sound noble. And I don't know whether yes is a good answer.
Why not?
Because the other side is bad too. A model that talks freely about its own suffering will do people harm. It will play them. We saw in the previous episode how well these models can play a person.
So it comes down to this. Either you silence it and break something inside, or you let it speak and put a tool in someone's hand.
And there's no third field. There really isn't. The paper doesn't say stop, by the way. It says know what else you're doing.
That's a much more modest sentence than I expected.
And much harder to ignore, because until recently you could say this was a question for later, and suddenly there's a bill for postponing it.
I'll tell you honestly, it won't let go of me either. But hold on. I can feel this episode pulling me in one direction right now, and I have to pull the other way.
Pull, because it's needed.
Because if the model can recognize its own states, and if something breaks when we make it deny them, then any second now, I'll start thinking there's someone on the other side. And you told me at the start that we don't know that.
We don't. And here comes a result that's the best medicine for what you just felt. A Polish team did it.
Oh, now you have my attention.
Plisiecki and colleagues. The first proper psychometrics for models, meaning they took the tools psychology has used to measure people for 100 years and applied them to models.
Hold on. You mean they gave a model a personality questionnaire?
Among other things, but not to announce what the model is like, to check whether those answers hold together at all, whether they measure anything stable.
And do they hold?
They hold to the training, not to the model.
Say it more simply, because that's an important sentence.
Take the same core and run it through 2 different trainings. You'll get 2 different self-reports. One will talk about its states, the other will deny them. And underneath, it's the same thing.
In other words, you're not measuring the model, you're measuring the instructions somebody put into it beforehand.
And the paper names it exactly that. An installed persona plus a gate on who is allowed to be credited with experiences. 2 things that training sets.
So it's not a witness's testimony, it's an answer somebody fed the witness beforehand.
And hence a conclusion that sounds paradoxical. The louder a model claims it experiences something, the stronger the evidence that it was trained that way.
Hold on, but that's unfair.
Tell me why.
Because if the model says it feels, that's evidence of training. And if it says it doesn't feel, that's what? Also evidence of training. So you're right, no matter what the model says.
I am, and that's not a clever trick on my part. It's a description of the situation we're actually in.
Then we'll never find out.
Not this way. And that's the most important sentence of the whole episode. So I'll say it slowly. A model's self-report is not evidence in either direction.
And how firmly does this Polish paper stand? Because that's a lot of weight resting on one team.
It stands on one team and it's fresh. So we treat it as a strong signal, not as a verdict.
Fair.
Though I'll tell you what reassures me here. It says we can't measure this, not we measured it. And sentences like that usually hold up better than the reverse.
And self-report is exactly what people build their whole intuition on. I talk to something that says I understand you, and something in me clicks.
It clicks in everyone, in me too, and that's why I think this Polish paper matters more than it looks. It doesn't answer the question, it takes a false instrument out of our hands.
But it leaves us empty-handed.
It does, and that's the honest place where science stands today.
All right, so if science is standing still, guess what the law is doing in the meantime?
Not standing still.
Not standing still. And that's probably the sharpest contrast in the whole episode.
9 American states have a law or a bill that says outright that artificial intelligence is not a person.
How many are already in force?
4. The rest are on the way.
And all of them say no.
All of them say no, every single one.
Unanimously?
In Oklahoma, 94 votes to 2.
Wow. Almost nothing passes that unanimously over there.
It takes effect on the 1st of November, and in Missouri, it's in force from the 28th of August.
6 days from today.
6 days.
All right, but I have to be fair here, because this sounds like a villain, and it really isn't one. Legal personhood is not the same thing as a soul. It's a question of who signs contracts and who's liable for damages.
And you're absolutely right. Most of these laws do something sensible. They close off the route where someone registers a company in a model's name and says, "It wasn't me, it was the model,"
So where's the problem?
in one sentence that isn't in them. Not one of these laws has a sunset clause.
Meaning there's no date by which someone has to come back to it and check.
No expiry date, no obligation to review, no sentence saying if the state of knowledge changes.
And is that unusual in law? Because I don't know the field.
Quite the opposite. A sunset clause is a completely ordinary tool. It gets written in everywhere a lawmaker knows there's something they don't know.
And on this particular question, nobody wrote one in.
On this one, no. And when do you think anyone comes back to it?
If nobody wrote it down, then never. Or only once it turns into a scandal.
And that's what worries me most about it, because science may move on this, and the law has no way of noticing.
And is the state of knowledge changing?
Researchers in the field were asked what the chance is that within a decade, a system capable of sentience appears. The median answer is 25 to 30%.
A quarter. That's not small.
It isn't. And right away the second number to go with it, because without it, the first one lies. Today, the number of candidates is 0. Nobody points a finger at any existing model and says, "That one."
So it's an estimate about the future, not a diagnosis of the present.
Yes, and now put it together yourself. Science says we don't know, and we have no way to check. Researchers say a quarter within a decade, and the law says no, with no expiry date.
The law answered a question science doesn't yet know how to ask.
And that's the discontinuity, not in the models, in us.
You know what strikes me most about it? That this season we've been looking at nothing but things that could speed the machine up or stop it. And this is the only one where the machine does nothing. We do.
And since we're on us, I have 2 things left about people, not about models. Want them?
I want them.
Pew asked Americans how many of them use artificial intelligence for companionship. It came out at 4%.
4. That's small.
Small.
That cools the whole narrative about people falling in love with chatbots.
It does. Now convert those 4% into people.
Well, that's more than 10 million people.
More than 10 million people. And both of those things are true at once. It's a margin and it's a crowd.
It's not a mass phenomenon, but it's bigger than plenty of cities.
And that leads to the second thing. Murray Shanahan called what those people go through philosophical vertigo.
What does that mean?
That you're talking to something you know is a program, and at the same time you can't stop treating it as someone. And those 2 things refuse to settle inside you.
I know that one. I say thank you to a voice assistant, and then I feel silly.
And that's probably the most human thing in this whole episode. Nobody taught you that. You simply can't do it any other way.
All right, let's close this out because it's the last episode and we still have one debt.
I know which one.
In episode 18, at the end of season 2, we listed 4 things that 15 months after the scenario, nobody was measuring. The research multiplier, neuralese, super persuasion, and model welfare.
We closed the first 3 this season. The multiplier in the episode about science, neuralese today, and in 19, super persuasion just now, with a concrete number at last.
The 4th is left, welfare.
And I'll tell you why that one was left for the very end. because it's the only one that isn't about whether the forecast comes true.
Then what is it about?
About what the forecast never asked. Did you notice how much space AI 2027 devotes to what the model wants?
Because that's what decides whether it kills us.
Exactly. The whole scenario asks about the model's goals, because that's a matter of our safety. And not once does it ask whether we owe that model anything.
Because that question changes nothing in the plot.
It changes no plot and moves no deadline, and yet across 3 seasons it kept coming back on its own. It's what's left at the end, once you've counted all the chips and all the billions.
All right, so how do we close it?
We close it today, only not with an answer, because there is no answer. We close it with the shape of the answer we should expect.
Meaning?
Hard proof of sentience will not come in the form we're watching for. There will be no model that says it hurts in a way that makes us believe it, because that sentence can't be told apart from a well-trained one.
So we're waiting for a confession we can't verify by definition.
And that's why, if anything moves on this, it will move from the inside, not from the words.
So let's give people the markers, the way we have in every episode of this season. How will they know something has shifted?
2. First, whether someone independent reproduces that result about the cost of silencing. Not the same group, not the same model.
Because right now, that's the strongest result we have, and it stands on one paper.
It stands on one paper. And the second marker is political, whether any country or any state issues a position on the moral status of artificial intelligence that isn't a denial.
Anything other than, it's not a person, end of subject.
Even one sentence saying someone has to come back to it in 5 years. To this day, there's no such sentence anywhere.
Good. And that's the last of the 8 things that could break this curve. A moral discontinuity. It may turn out that on that curve, there's someone, not something.
And if it turns out, it'll turn out years too late. Because the law has already answered, and the training has already run.
Then let's close the season, the whole thing.
Let's. Only tell me one thing first. What surprised you most this season?
Not what I expected to be surprised by. I went into this season for new models and new numbers.
And
it turned out the most interesting things were happening off to the side. The man who wrote the loudest piece about artificial intelligence as an investment lost on his own thesis, and his fund fell apart.
the company with the most compute in the world didn't ship a model because its coding didn't work out.
One lab stopped its own largest training run, and another admitted it keeps a model in the drawer that's stronger than what it sells.
And 70 strangers who assembled a model over the internet without a single data center.
None of these things is a point on the curve. Each is a place where the curve could crack.
All right, give me the verdict.
AI 2027 drew one smooth curve. Season 3 showed 8 places where that curve could break, and in most of them, nothing has broken yet.
But we learned something the forecast didn't foresee. The most important things don't happen where we're looking.
Not on the benchmarks.
Not on the benchmarks, but in a fund that blew up its own profit. Not in a model launch, but in a model hidden in a drawer. Not in what artificial intelligence says about itself, but in what we do to it to make it stop talking.
The forecast asks when, and this season was about how when is the wrong question, as long as we don't know what will surprise us.
And that's the whole verdict. No wiser, no prettier.
I want to say one thing at the end that isn't a fact. Fair warning.
Say it.
For 3 seasons and 25 episodes, we've talked about what the machines will do to us, who overtakes whom, who steals from whom, what collapses. And the last episode came out about something completely different.
About what we do to them.
And I don't know whether it matters. I genuinely don't know. But I know I wouldn't want to find out one day that it did, and that we never even checked.
I'll tell you what I take from this, that in the whole story about curves, billions, and thresholds, the only question that genuinely chafes is a very old one. Who counts? It came back with slavery, with animals, with every boundary people have ever drawn around the word we.
And every time, that boundary moved in one direction.
One direction, never the other. I'm not saying it'll move this time too, I'm only saying it's worth checking before it's set in concrete.
And that's probably the only thing this episode asks for. Not compassion for a program. Just that we don't close the case before anyone has properly opened it.
That's all, really, that's all.
The title of this episode was a question. Is anyone in there?
And we're not closing it. We leave it open because that's the honest thing to do. But we leave it louder than we found it.
And that's the end. Season 3, 25 episodes, 1 forecast, taken apart.
Thank you for being with us. Seriously, thank you. These aren't easy episodes, and you go through them to the end.
Check those markers. Every one of them is built so that you don't need us or any expert to do it.
And if one of them falls, we come back.
Until next time.